Hello, nice to see you. I thought I would share with you the sermon I prepared for last Sunday, my last sermon to you, which unfortunately I didn't get to preach. But first thing, you need to know that Peter is okay. He spent the day in hospital on Sunday. He returned home in the evening, and I spoke with Barbara on Monday, and he's improved. He's just resting, and that's what we can hope for. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for your prayers and your concern for Peter and Barbara. Anyway, I wanted to share this sermon with you because it's my favorite psalm. Not psalm, it's my favorite parable. It's found in the Gospel of St. Matthew. It's the story of the workers in the vineyard. And this parable just says so much. It's a parable of grace. And I just wanted to share that with you as my final wish and my final blessing for you as you move on into the future. And I know that the future is going to be very bright indeed. You see, the Christian community is continues to be scandalized by divine generosity. I'm going to unpack that over the course of this sermon, but I want to say that again. The Christian community still is scandalized by divine generosity. So, there's a playwright. His name is Jean Aoul, and he imagines in one of his plays how the Last Judgment works. So, this is how he has set the scene. The righteous, the good people, have arrived at the pearly gates, and they're all waiting for their entrance into the kingdom of heaven. They're waiting for Peter to come out or Jesus to come out and to welcome them in. And they're sort of anxious and they're nervous and they're looking forward to receiving all the rewards they are going to receive because of their good works, the good works that they've done over their lifetime. They know that they've got reserved seats, and they are keen about that. So they're milling about at the pearly gates, waiting for Jesus to come and let them in. But then a rumor starts to wash over them, and you can sort of see heads turning and whispers being made as the rumor sort of washes over a wave like them. And the rumor is this, that there's the unrighteous coming into the kingdom of heaven as well. And they're also at the pearly gates. And these are not good people. These have not been people who have spent their life serving God and serving humanity. And then the rumor begins to compound is that Jesus has indeed forgiven them as well, and that they will have a place in the kingdom of God alongside the righteous. Well, the righteous start to get indignant. They start to sputter, they start to rage, they start to curse God after all that we have done for the Lord. And he's letting them in too? Shouldn't we have rights? Don't we have privilege? And in their rage and in their sputtering and in their cursing, they end up cursing God and thus condemning themselves outside of the kingdom. They excommunicated themselves because of their attitude, because they did not want to share, they did not want to accept God's abundance, they did not want to accept God's grace. I tell you that playwright's imagining because now I want to turn to the parable of the workers in the vineyard. You heard it read on Sunday. I'm just going to recap it for you. Some of us actually had a great study of it yesterday in the midweek service, 16 of us as it turns out. So the parable goes like this. It starts off with the phrase, the kingdom of heaven is like a vineyard owner who needs workers to work in his vineyard. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, he goes to the hiring hall, the town center, the village square, whatever it was, and he gathers up all the available people to work in his vineyard because it's harvest time. It's harvest time, and he needs his grapes picked. So he goes out at 8 o'clock in the morning and he gathers up the workers there, sends them into the field, and says, I will pay you a fair wage. And they all agree that he is going to pay them a few denarii. Perfect. All agreed. Off they go into the vineyard. A couple hours later, the vineyard owner goes back to the hiring hall or to the village square, and he sees that there's more that have not been hired. So he hires them. He says, I will give you a fair wage. He goes back at 9, he goes back at noon, he goes back at 3, each time hiring more people. He's got a lot of work that needs to get done. Each time hiring new people to work in his vineyard, and each time saying, I will pay you a fair wage. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he goes to the hiring hall one last time, and there are still people who are looking and waiting for work. He says, I will send you out into the field, even though it's only for an hour. I will send you out into the field, and I will pay you a fair wage. That's what they do. They go out, they work for an hour or so, and then it's pay time. The scene changes. Work is done in the vineyard for the day, and now it's pay time. And the farmer, the vineyard owner, calls the ones who were hired last, the ones who were hired at 5 o'clock. He invites them to come and receive their pay. And you know what? They get a full day's wage. For 1 hour work, they get a full day's wage. They're overjoyed, of course. Now, those who were hired first, who worked the full day in the sun, who sweated, who carried baskets of grape back and forth, they're excited because, wow, if those got a full day's wage for an hour's work, imagine what we're going to get. But when it came time for them to be paid, they were paid exactly the same. They sputter, they cough, they rage. This is unfair. We have worked all day in the sun, in the heat. We've carried all these grapes, and yet you're just giving us, well, the vineyard owner goes, well, we agreed. Didn't you agree that this was the wage that you were going to get? Well, yes, we did. Then what's the problem? Well, it's not fair. Oh, says the vineyard owner. You're jealous of my generosity. You're jealous of my grace. Oh, I see what the problem is. But you see, everything I have is mine, and I am free to do with it what I wish. It's a parable, I like to say, of inequity. There's a couple of parables in a row here that are parables of inequity. These parables are located in the Gospel of Matthew, in the chapter just before Jesus enters into Jerusalem. And this is significant, I think. This is incredibly significant because Jesus is about to undergo the most inequitable ordeal that any human can face. Jesus goes into Jerusalem, hailed as a king. Within a week, he's on a cross. Talk about inequity. And so it's interesting to me that the parables of inequity in the Gospel of Matthew are located in chapter 20. Kind of seems to be setting something up. But I want to set that aside and talk a little bit about how we see God. How do you see God? What is God like to you? What are God's characteristics and attributes? What's God's personality? One of the things that I've worked on over the years in my preaching and in my ministry with people is to help them see God for who God is and not for who they think God is. I've countless times heard people say things like, well, God is going to zap me with lightning because I've entered into these church doors after a year or two. Well, A, wrong God. Zeus is the one that hurls thunderbolts. B, that's not the God of Jesus Christ. That's not the God of the New Testament. God is not up there in some tower keeping a ledger of all the things that we have done right and all the things that we have done wrong. God's not like that. Jesus is trying to reveal something different about God. And that something different is contained in this very parable. The vineyard owner is God. He goes to the hiring hall, the village square, and he hires people to work in his vineyard. And then he goes and hires again. And then he goes and hires again at noon, and then at 3, and then at 5. In our Bible study yesterday, Ann Saxton pointed out that there's kind of a vigilance about this landowner, this vineyard owner, because he's persistent. He persistently seeks out people to work in his vineyard. And Jesus is trying to tell us that God's like that. He's persistently seeking us out. And then it doesn't seem to care how much we've worked or what we've accomplished or how righteous we are or whatever. We still receive the same abundance from God because we're all the same. If you are a good and holy person, well done. Thank you. If you've spent your lifetime doing good work, God bless you. And if you're a person that's made mistakes, stumbled, lied, that's okay. God's not keeping a ledger. God is trying to reveal in this parable of the workers in the vineyard that we're all the same. We are all loved. We all receive the grace of God. How do we see God? And I say again, I'm trying to remind us, and I've tried to in my ministry, help people see God as God is and not what we think or fear that God is. There's another parable, this one not in the Gospel of Matthew, but in the Gospel of Luke that we know so well. The parable of the prodigal son. What do we have here? We've got a selfish, greedy son, one of two, who takes half of his father's inheritance, squanders it, goes off to the far country, wine, women, and song, all of that, ends up feeding swine. And he remembers, this prodigal son, he remembers that even the pigs in his father's household are treated better than he is being treated right at this moment. So he returns home. He walks home. And I just love how this parable is laid out, because it says, while he was a far ways off, his father saw him and ran to him. His father was sitting on the porch, looking. Where's my son? When will my son come home? And as soon as he sees the son, he dashes off. He, in an uncharacteristic Middle Eastern way, where everything is very formal and proper, he throws himself into his son's arm. He hugs him and hugs him and hugs him. And then he calls out to his staff and servants. He says, go fetch the finest robes to put on my son. Let's get him cleaned up and go kill the fatted calf so that we can celebrate. Because my son was once lost and now is found. What does that parable tell us about God? He's not sitting on the front porch with a ledger, keeping track of the things that we've done right and the things that we've done wrong. He is waiting, God is waiting for that first moment, that first sign that we are turning back, and then God comes running. How ungodlike. How ungodlike to get off his throne, go running through the fields, across the hills and dales, to welcome us, to hug us, to bring us back into the kingdom. In the French Easter liturgy, there is a phrase that the French use that goes like this: L'amour de Dieu est folie. L'amour de Dieu est folie. The love of God is foolishness. Whether it's the parable of the workers in the vineyard or the parable of the prodigal son, we find that there's always a moment of conflict as well. We see that God is acting not in a way that we expect God to act. We see that God is acting in a foolish, extravagant, generous, grace-filled way. But we also see the reaction, the human reaction to that grace, is that sometimes it just doesn't seem fair. Those workers that were hired at the beginning of the day, this is not fair. We worked all day. The older brother and the prodigal son, you remember that's part of the story? So they're having a big party for the prodigal son, a big banquet. Father's called all his friends, his friends and his son's friends in. And what's the older brother doing? Drumming his fingers. Rage. Bitterness. Dad, I have been steadfast. Dad, I've been loyal. Dad, I've been here for you all along. But why are you having a party for him? And the father's response is, my son is home. He was once lost, and now he is found. And we're so grateful. Come on, rejoice with me. That which was once lost is now found. In these two parables, we find something new about God. That God is open-hearted, generous, full of grace, and doesn't keep track of your wrongs or your rights for that matter. God just loves. God just is. My last week here with you, what a tremendous privilege it has been to serve you. It's surprising because what I thought I was going to come in and do turned out to be something quite different. But it's all worked out really well. And I'm so happy for you. You're in a good place now as the community of Christ the King. And I'm pretty confident that you're going to get some good news very soon. And that you can begin again. And I want to tell you this, God's not going to keep track of all the things you did right and all the things that you did wrong. God's just going to open the doors, open the windows, let the Spirit rush in. And you do the same. Open the doors and open the hearts, open the windows of your heart, and let the Spirit rush in. And remember, l'amour de Dieu est folie. The love of God is foolishness. And God is foolishly and recklessly in love with you. Every blessing to you, you lovely people of Christ the King. And amen.